Let's take a fascinating journey into the Garden of Eden. In the opening books of Genesis, we see that God creates this unbelievable universe full of celestial bodies and the ocean and the plants and the animals. And then he creates the pinnacle of creation. He creates the first man. And he takes this first man and he puts him into the middle of the Garden of Eden and he tells him, you're allowed to eat of all of the fruits of the trees, but of one tree you're not allowed to eat, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because on the day that you eat of it, you're going to die. And then he looks at man and he says, it's really not good for man to be alone. So he brings him a bunch of animals. And Adam names these animals. Now, we spoke in a previous video how the name of something in Hebrew expresses its essence. So Adam sees these different animals and he names them according to what their essence is. And when he's done naming these animals, he realizes that there's nobody for him. There's nobody who shares his essence. There's nobody like him. So God puts him into a deep sleep and he separates woman from him and he brings them together. And Adam and Chava, or Adam and Eve, begin their life together. This leads us to a very interesting question. Why didn't God create two individual human beings, Adam and Eve, at the same time and let them just be married from the very beginning? The answer is that God wanted Adam to feel a lack. Only after he went out and he saw the whole world and he saw that I really don't have somebody to be my helpmate, to understand me, to work together with me, somebody who shares my essence. Only once he felt that lack, then God said, oh, okay, now I can give you a wife in order that you should really appreciate her. A short while after all this happens, the serpent approaches Eve and he asks her, did God say that you should not eat of any tree of the garden? And she's like, no, there's only one tree that we're not allowed to eat from. Now, let's stop and think about this. What is going on here? Why is the serpent approaching Eve? And why is he asking this specific question? The Bible tells us that the serpent was the most intelligent of all creatures, the most cunning of them all. And it also tells us that it could speak, right? He's having a conversation with Chava, with Eve. And later on, after this whole story happens, we find out that he has a change in his nature and that he loses his feet. He's made to slither across his belly on the ground. So we have this animal that walks and it talks and it's intelligent. And he's coming over to Eve and he's telling her, like, did God really give you commandments? Did he tell you you're not supposed to be eating from trees? What was his point? What was he trying to say? He was trying to say, I'm very similar to you. What makes you different? Because stop and think about it. We just had this whole naming process where Adam went and looked at the essence of each creature and he gave them their name. And after he saw each creature, he saw that none of them were of the same substance as him. None of them had the same essence. And the snake was insulted. He's like, you're very similar. We're the same thing. You're not any different from me. You're just a walking, talking lump of clay as well. I'm an animal. You're an animal. And you think God gave you commandments? He told you not to eat of everything? So Chava was forced to reason with him. And she's like, no, God just gave us one commandment. But here she made a very fatal mistake. She added to God's word. She said, no, we just have one tree that we're not allowed to eat and to touch. God never said she wasn't allowed to touch it. So here's where the snake saw his opportunity. He pushes her against the tree, she touches it, and she sees, oh, wait a second, we're not going to die. And that was what she had told him. She said, on the day that we touch it, we're going to die. God loves us. He gave us his commandment in order to protect us. He doesn't want us to die. Don't touch it because I don't want you to die. But now, after Chava touches this tree and she sees that she's fine, that she's okay, that she's not hurt, that she's not harmed, she's like, oh, okay, there's some kind of information here that, changes the situation. I didn't die from touching it. And the serpent tells her, he said, really? He said, the real reason that God doesn't want you to eat of this tree is because there's another reason. And he says, I have this information because I was created before you, right? The animals were created before man. So he says, I know that God doesn't want you to eat from this because when you eat of it, you're going to become like God. Whoa. Now, for a very spiritual person, this is very enticing. Chava hears, I can be more like God. I can really know good and evil. That would help me to serve him better. So she begins to rationalize that this is the right thing to do. God didn't want us to eat from this because he didn't want it to harm us. But I can serve him better because I'll truly know what it is to have understanding of good and evil. This is a great thing. The verse tells us very specifically that she sees that this tree is desirable as a means to wisdom. So fine, she takes from this tree, she eats of it, she gives it to her husband, and then bam! All of a sudden, their intellectual eyes are open, and they look down like, oh my gosh, we're not wearing any clothes. This is kind of awkward. And they start thinking, like, this is not how it's supposed to be. You see, at that moment, they experienced some kind of monumental change. What was that change? The Bible tells us that before they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, They were naked and they felt no shame. But afterwards, all of a sudden they felt shame. Why? What was the nature of this tree? The name of the tree is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, the word for knowledge in Hebrew is das. It doesn't mean to just fleetingly know. It means to intimately know, to really have an understanding. And this is the word that is used when it says Adam knew Eve. He was intimate with her. You see, up until this point, Adam and Eve knew what good and evil were. They knew that they could choose to disobey God. However, it was completely out of the realm of reality. It's kind of like somebody cooking in the kitchen. They're not just going to stick their hand in fire because they know it's going to hurt them. It doesn't make any sense to them. They would never do it. It's out of the realm of reality, even though they could, right? So up until this point, Adam and Eve were aware that they could sin. They knew what good and evil were, but it wasn't intimate inside of them. When Eve ate from this fruit of the tree, it wasn't because she was willfully rebelling against God. It was because an external force, the snake, had come to her and had confused her, had created a situation in which she didn't fully understand what she was doing. She wasn't making a choice to rebel against God. She had faulty reasoning. It's a different type of sin than saying, I'm going to grab this tree because God said I shouldn't eat of it. That's why I'm going to go and choose this tree out of all the trees inside of the garden. That's not what happened. It wasn't rebellion. But when Adam and Eve consumed this fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they became intimate with the knowledge of good and evil. It became a part of them. All of a sudden, they had this tug of war. The evil inclination, which was external, became internalized. It became a thing that was inside of themselves, creating this tug of war, this tension. It doesn't mean that they became evil. It means that they had two separate drives pulling them in two separate ways. All of a sudden, they understood what it was to struggle with good and evil. Before they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they were like babies who had a certain innocence when it comes to understanding what the physical desires of the body can lead them to. But after they ate of the tree of knowledge, once they had this tension inside of them, they're like, we better be clothed. This is not appropriate. This can lead to inappropriate situations. This can lead to untoward desires of the flesh. So they wanted to clothe themselves because they had this new awareness. Then they undergo a few other changes. God comes to them and tells them, you're going to give birth in pain, and you're going to have to toil for your food. Why? Moreover, why are they banished from the Garden of Eden? God says, now they've become like the unique one among us. What does that mean? Now, according to Christian interpretation, these were punishments, and the people were cursed. But the Bible doesn't mention that they were cursed at all. It says the ground is cursed because of them, and it says that the snake is cursed. But it doesn't say that they're cursed at all. God was giving us the tools to manage this newfound internalized drive toward evil. He was giving us the ability to overcome. What do I mean? You see, God created animals without a sense of free will, whereas God, He chose to create the world. He's the only being that had free will until that point in time. And human beings didn't have real free will until they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because the balance was skewed. Adam and Eve knew that just like sticking your hand in a hot pot is a bad idea, they also knew that eating from a tree in rebellion to God is a very bad idea. They wouldn't do it unless they made some kind of intellectual mistake. But all of a sudden, after they consumed the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then they had this equal balance inside of them. The leanings towards doing good and the leanings towards doing bad. All of a sudden, both sides became rather enticing. That's what free will is. When we have two equally enticing options before us, and we can choose which one we're going to go with. So human beings became like God, and the fact that we have true free will, we can choose to behave in a godly manner, or we can choose to behave abominably. So after we internalize this drive, after we develop true free will, God says, you're going to need some tools to handle this. So the first thing He says is, okay, you're going to have a change in nature. Eve is going to give birth in pain. There's going to be issues with, bearing children. Adam is going to have to go out and work really hard to get food. Why? Why would God do that? You see, when a person feels a lack, they feel that they can't provide for their family, or they can't even get pregnant, what are they going to do? The natural instinct is to realize that, oh my gosh, I don't run this world, but there is somebody who does, and I'm going to call out to Him. I'm going to say, God, help me. I can't do this alone. Please give me food to keep my family alive. Please help this baby to be healthy, to grow to full term, to be delivered safely. Please, God, help us to raise our children to maturity. Help them to be good people. A situation of lack makes us turn to God. Now, very interesting, the last 3 verses inside of Genesis chapter 3 tell us exactly why God expelled Adam and Eve. And it's not because they were so evil. No, it's because there's another tree inside of the Garden of Eden that you might not have picked up on. That's the tree of life. A tree that imparted immortality. So this tree was not an issue for them as long as they had not internalized the drive toward evil. They could have eaten from it. They could have remained immortal. It would have been fine. But all of a sudden, once they internalized the drive toward evil, if a person is immortal and they have a drive towards evil within them, what's to stop them from, just engaging in this downward spiral? I'm going to live forever, so let me do whatever I want. So God created a situation in which they would no longer have access to the tree of life, so that they couldn't put themselves into an immortal state. And God created a situation of lack where they would have to turn to them. God says, I want a relationship with each and every one of you. And yes, I want you to overcome evil because you have free will. And free will is the only way that you can truly engage in a relationship with me. You can choose me, but you can also choose evil. And if you choose me, despite having the drive towards evil, that is so beloved, that is so precious, and that is so awesome. So Adam and Eve went out into this world of ours, and they went out to work it. They went out to bring life into it. They went out to take this physical world and to infuse it with godliness. They went out to elevate it, to bring it back to a holy state. And we will get there. Right now, it's a struggle. Yes, we all struggle with evil inclination. But we can overcome it. The Bible tells us many times you can do it. And the Bible also promises us that in the times of the Messiah, when the real Mashiach makes his blessed appearance, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is no longer going to be a stumbling block for us. Ezekiel tells us that there will be no more willful sin. There will be unintentional sin, just like Chava, Eve, made this miscalculation. There can still be errors. That can happen. And in fact, Ezekiel tells us that the Messiah himself is going to bring a bull as a sin sacrifice for unintentional sins, for his sins and the sins of the people. But willful sin will be abolished in the Messianic era. Right now, we still have to struggle with it. It's a choice, and you can overcome it. So let's keep working at overcoming the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and making this world a holy place. And let us greet soon, very, very soon, the real Mashiach, because he's right around the corner.